Raghav was not born into success. He was born into noise. The noise of expectations, comparisons, and quiet disappointments that echoed in the corners of his home. His father worked tirelessly, yet it never seemed enough. His mother carried hope in her eyes, but that hope often trembled when bills piled up. Raghav grew up watching struggle so closely that it became normal, almost like breathing. Yet deep inside, he carried a strange feeling. Not confidence, not even ambition, but a stubborn belief that his life would not end the way it began. As a child, Raghav was average in everything. He was not the smartest student, not the most talented, not the most confident. Teachers barely noticed him. Friends often overlooked him. In a classroom full of voices, he was just another quiet presence. But silence can be deceptive. Beneath his calm exterior, his mind was always observing, always questioning. He noticed how some students got opportunities while others didn't. He noticed how confidence often mattered more than ability. And most importantly, he noticed how fear stopped people before failure even could. One day, during a school presentation, Raghav was asked to speak in front of the class. His hands trembled, his throat went dry, and his mind went blank. Words refused to come out. The class burst into laughter, and that laughter burned into his memory. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was a moment that defined how he saw himself. That day, he walked home slower than usual, carrying not just his bag, but a heavy thought. Maybe I'm not meant for anything big. Days turned into months, and that belief began to settle in him like dust. He stopped trying to stand out. He avoided situations where he might fail. He chose comfort over growth, silence over expression. Life became predictable, safe, and small. But deep inside, that quiet voice still existed, faint, almost fading, whispering that this wasn't the life he was meant to live. Everything changed one evening when Raghav saw his father sitting alone, staring at a pile of unpaid bills. There was something different in his father's eyes. Not anger, not frustration, but helplessness. It was the first time Raghav truly understood what struggle looked like. Not loud, not dramatic, but silent and heavy. That moment shook him. For the first time, his fear felt smaller than his responsibility. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind kept repeating one thought. If I don't change, nothing will. It was a simple realization, but powerful enough to shift something inside him. He didn't suddenly become confident. He didn't magically gain skills, but he made a decision, a quiet, personal promise, that he would not let his fear control his future anymore. The next day, he did something unusual. He spoke up in class. His voice was shaky, his sentences imperfect, but he spoke. Some students laughed again, but this time it felt different. It still hurt, but it didn't stop him, because now he understood something important. Pain is temporary, but regret lasts much longer. Raghav began working on himself in small ways. He started reading daily, even if it was just a few pages. He practiced speaking alone, repeating sentences again and again until they felt natural. He watched videos, observed how people communicated, and tried to imitate them. It was slow progress, painfully slow, but it was progress nonetheless. Weeks turned into months, and something began to change. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually. He started forming better sentences. His thoughts became clearer. His fear didn't disappear, but it became manageable. And most importantly, he began to believe that improvement was possible. However, growth is never a straight line. Just when things seemed to improve, life tested him again. Raghav failed an important exam. It wasn't just a failure. It was a blow to his confidence. People around him started saying the same things again. Maybe this isn't for you. You should be realistic. Those words felt familiar, like echoes from his past. For a moment, he almost gave up. The old thoughts returned. The old fears resurfaced. It felt easier to stop trying than to face another failure. But this time, something inside him resisted. He remembered his father's eyes. He remembered the promise he had made to himself. And he realized that failure was not the end. It was just part of the process. Instead of quitting, Raghav did something different. He analyzed his mistakes. He tried to understand where he went wrong. He changed his approach, studied smarter, and worked harder. It wasn't easy. There were days when he felt exhausted, days when progress seemed invisible, and days when quitting felt tempting. But he kept going. And slowly results began to show. He passed the next exam. Then he improved his scores. Then he started gaining confidence. Each small win added to his belief. Each step forward reminded him that effort matters. Not immediate results, not perfection, but consistent effort. Years passed, and Raghav transformed into someone unrecognizable from his past. He was no longer the silent boy in the classroom. He spoke with clarity. He carried himself with confidence. He wasn't perfect, but he was stronger, mentally, emotionally, and intellectually. But the most important change wasn't visible from the outside. It was inside him. He no longer feared failure. He no longer depended on others' opinions. He no longer saw himself as average. He saw himself as someone who could grow. One day, Raghav got an opportunity to speak on a stage. It wasn't a huge event, but for him, it meant everything. Years ago, he couldn't speak a single sentence in front of a classroom. Now, he was about to address an audience. As he stood there, looking at the crowd, he felt nervous. But this time, he didn't try to eliminate the fear. He embraced it, because he knew that courage is not the absence of fear. It is action, despite fear. He began to speak. His voice was steady. His thoughts were clear. His words carried meaning. And as he spoke, he realized something powerful. The same boy who once felt invisible was now being heard. After the speech, people approached him. They appreciated his journey, his words, his confidence. Some even said they were inspired by him. It felt surreal, not because he had become successful, but because he had become someone he once thought he never could be. That night, Raghav sat quietly, reflecting on his journey. He realized that nothing in his life changed overnight. There was no single moment of transformation, no sudden breakthrough, just small decisions repeated daily, choosing to try, choosing to continue, choosing not to quit. And that made all the difference. He understood that most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they stop too soon, because they expect fast results, because they fear judgment, because they underestimate the power of consistency. Raghav smiled as he thought about his past self, the boy who was afraid to speak, afraid to fail, afraid to stand out. If he could go back and say one thing to that boy, it would be simple. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to keep going. Life didn't become perfect after that. There were still challenges, still failures, still moments of doubt. But now, Raghav had something stronger than fear. He had resilience. And resilience changes everything. Because when you stop fearing failure, you start unlocking potential. When you stop waiting for the perfect moment, you start creating opportunities. When you stop doubting yourself, you start building yourself. Raghav's journey wasn't extraordinary because of talent or luck. It was extraordinary because he refused to stay the same. And that's what most people don't realize. You don't need a different life to succeed. You need a different mindset.